Junko Furuta's death is one of the most horrifying and disturbing cases of torture in modern history. In 1988, at the age of 17, Junko was kidnapped, imprisoned, and subjected to unimaginable suffering at the hands of 4 teenage boys in Japan. The details of her abuse and death are deeply unsettling, making this one of the most infamous criminal cases in Japanese history. She was known for her good grades, responsible nature, and ambitions for the future. Unlike many of her peers, she avoided drinking, smoking, and partying, instead focusing on her studies and part-time job. Her tragic fate was sealed on November 25, 1988, when she was targeted by a group of local delinquents led by Hiroshi Miyano, a 17-year-old with connections to the Yakuza. Miyano had previously shown interest in Junko, but she had rejected his advances, unknowingly making herself a target for his cruelty. On the evening of her abduction, Miyano and his gang had been loitering around, looking for someone to assault. As part of a planned scheme, one of them pretended to be a stranger in need, luring Junko into helping him. As soon as she was alone with him, Miyano appeared and staged a fake rescue, pretending to protect her from the other delinquent. Under the pretense of walking her home, Miyano led Junko to an isolated location, where he revealed his true intentions. He threatened her with violence and dragged her to an abandoned house, where the rest of his gang awaited. What followed was an unimaginable nightmare. The gang transported Junko to the home of one of their members, where she was imprisoned for 44 days. During this time, she was subjected to extreme physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. The 4 boys, along with other accomplices who were invited over, tortured her in ways that defied human decency. They beat her relentlessly, burned her with cigarettes and lighters, and forced her to endure starvation and dehydration. She was sexually abused an estimated 500 times, often by multiple individuals in a single day. They mutilated her body, breaking her bones, crushing her fingers, and burning her eyelids with melted wax. She was even forced to drink her own urine and eat cockroaches. As the abuse escalated, her body began to deteriorate as her injuries went untreated and infection set in. Despite her suffering, Junko never attempted to escape. She was aware that Miyano's gang had Yakuza connections, and they had threatened to kill her family if she tried to flee. Eventually, she became so physically broken that she could no longer move, and the boys ended up losing interest in her, growing frustrated with her deteriorating condition. On January 4th, 1989, after losing a game of mahjong, the gang decided to unleash their anger on Junko one final time. They beat her with an iron barbell, set her legs on fire with lighter fluid, and kicked her in the stomach so hard that she went into convulsions. After hours of relentless torture, Junko finally succumbed to her injuries. Realizing that she was dead, the boys panicked. They stuffed her corpse into a large oil drum, filled it with wet concrete, and abandoned it in a rural area. They believed that the concrete would prevent the body from being discovered, but that was not the case. Weeks later, police arrested Miyano in connection with another assault, and during interrogation, one of the gang members, believing the police had already discovered Junko's body, confessed to the killing. This led authorities to the oil drum, where Junko's remains were recovered. The trial that followed was met with public outrage. Because the perpetrators were minors, they received lenient sentences despite the horrific nature of their crimes. Miyano, the ringleader, was sentenced to only 20 years in prison, while others received lesser terms. Some were released even within a decade, free to resume their lives, while Junko's was brutally cut short. This injustice infuriated the public, with many calling for harsher punishments. Junko's death left a deep scar on Japanese society. Her case serves as a grim reminder of the failures of the justice system and the horrifying depths of human cruelty. Despite her suffering, Junko remains a symbol of resilience, and her story continues to be remembered as one of the most brutal and tragic killings in history. Isadora Duncan was a pioneer of modern dance, as she revolutionized the art form, rejecting the traditionally rigid ballet techniques in favor of fluid, natural movements. However, her untimely and horrific demise in Nice, France, remains one of the most bizarre accidents in history. Her signature accessory, a long flowing scarf, became the instrument of her own killing in an incident that was as dramatic as any of her performances. Before her death, Duncan had lived a life filled with both success and tragedy. Born in 1877 in San Francisco, she spent much of her career in Europe, where she became one of the most influential dancers of her time. She was known not only for her groundbreaking artistic vision, but also for her unconventional lifestyle, radical political beliefs, and numerous romantic entanglements. However, her personal life was filled with loss. In 1913, her 2 young children drowned in the Seine River after their car rolled into the water. This devastating event deeply affected her, and she never fully recovered from the grief. In the years that followed, Duncan's career declined, and by the mid-1920s, she was struggling financially, moving between France and the Soviet Union in search of stability. On the evening of September 14, 1927, Duncan was in Nice, enjoying what was meant to be a leisurely drive with a friend. She had recently purchased a brand new convertible ammo car, a small but sporty vehicle popular in France at the time. As she prepared for the ride, she wrapped a long, flowing silk scarf around her neck, which was a signature fashion choice that had become part of her public persona. This particular scarf, reportedly a gift from a friend, was exceptionally long and made of a delicate yet strong fabric. She climbed into the passenger seat of the open-top car, excitedly telling her companions, "Goodbye, my friends, I go to glory." These would be her last words. As the car sped off, her scarf, caught in the wind, trailed behind her. The loose end of the scarf became entangled in the spokes of the car's rear wheel or the open axle. In an instant, the tightening fabric yanked her body backward with immense force. The sudden, brutal jerk snapped her neck and likely caused immediate death. Some accounts suggest she was nearly decapitated, while others claim she was dragged from the vehicle, her head striking the pavement with fatal impact. Witnesses watched in horror as the dancer, once so full of life and movement, was left lifeless beside the road. The driver, unaware of what had happened at first, only stopped when he felt the abrupt force pulling at Duncan's body. The aftermath of Duncan's death was met with shock and disbelief. She had survived so much personal tragedy, only to meet an end so grotesque. The French press immediately reported the bizarre accident, and soon, the news spread across Europe and America. Her funeral was held in Paris, where her ashes were placed at Père Lachaise Cemetery. Admirers mourned the loss of a visionary artist whose contributions to dance had reshaped the art world. Though her career had dwindled in her later years, her legacy endured, inspiring generations of dancers who followed in her footsteps. Today, Isadora Duncan is remembered not just for the tragic circumstances of her death, but for her immense influence on modern dance. However, the manner in which she died remains one of the most unusual and disturbing deaths in history. Grigori Rasputin's death is one of the most infamous and bizarre assassinations in history, with it being surrounded by mystery and conspiracy. He was a controversial figure in the Russian imperial court as he wielded enormous influence over Tsarina Alexandra, leading to resentment among the Russian nobility. His assassination in December 1916 was the result of a conspiracy by aristocrats who saw him as a dangerous manipulator whose continued presence threatened the Russian Empire. The details of his final moments remain heavily debated, but contemporary accounts suggest he suffered a violent and horrific end. To understand Rasputin's death, it is important to first understand the circumstances that led to his assassination. Born into a peasant family in Siberia, Rasputin rose to prominence due to his reputation as a mystic and healer. His supposed ability to alleviate the suffering of Tsarevich Alexei, the hemophiliac son of Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra, granted him immense favor with the imperial family. As Russia was plunged into World War I and civil unrest grew, Rasputin's influence over Alexandra, who ruled in Nicholas's absence, made him a target of the Russian aristocracy. Many nobles and politicians blamed him for the empire's instability, believing he manipulated the Tsarina and promoted corrupt, incompetent officials. As Russia edged closer to revolution, a group of conspirators led by right-wing politician Vladimir Pyrishkovich decided that Rasputin had to be eliminated to save the monarchy. On the night of December 29, 1916, Rasputin was lured to the Moika Palace, the residence of Prince Yusupov, under the pretense of meeting Yusupov's wife. In reality, she was not present, and the conspirators had prepared a deadly trap. Yusupov entertained Rasputin in a lavishly decorated basement room, offering him cakes and wine that had been laced with a massive dose of potassium cyanide. The poison was supposed to kill him quickly, but to the assassin's horror, Rasputin showed no signs of distress. He continued eating and drinking, seemingly unaffected by the lethal substance. Panicked that the poison had failed, Yusupov retrieved a revolver and shot Rasputin in the chest. Believing him to be dead, the conspirators left the room, only for Yusupov to return later and check on the body. To his absolute shock, Rasputin's eyes snapped open, and he lunged at Yusupov with terrifying strength. The mystic, now covered in blood, walked up the stairs and out into the courtyard, desperately trying to escape. His resilience shocked his killers, but they quickly ran after him. Purishkevich fired multiple shots, hitting Rasputin twice, once in the back and another in the head. Still, the man clung to life. Finally, after beating him repeatedly and ensuring he was no longer moving, the assassins wrapped his body in a heavy cloth, bound him, and carried him to a frozen section of the Neva River. The conspirators dumped Rasputin's body through a hole in the ice, hoping the freezing water would obscure any evidence of the killing. However, when his corpse was recovered days later, an autopsy revealed a chilling discovery. Rasputin had water in his lungs, suggesting he was still alive when he was thrown into the river and ultimately drowned. His death, which was meant to be swift and discreet, had turned into a gruesome and drawn-out ordeal, adding to the legend that Rasputin was nearly impossible to kill. While his killers believed that eliminating him would restore stability to Russia, it had the opposite effect. Alexandra was devastated, convinced that his death signaled the end of the Romanov dynasty. Just months later, the Russian Revolution erupted, leading to the resignation of Nicholas II and the execution of the royal family in 1918. Rasputin's death, rather than saving the monarchy, became one of the many catalysts that sealed its doom. The legend of Rasputin only grew after his death, and his near invulnerability contributed to rumors that he possessed supernatural abilities. While modern historians suggest that exaggerations have distorted the actual events, the gruesome details of his death continue to captivate the public imagination. Whether or not Rasputin truly exhibited the resilience described in these accounts, his brutal and drawn-out execution remains one of history's most chilling political assassinations. Emperor Valerian's death is considered one of the most humiliating and disturbing ends for a Roman emperor. Captured by the Persian king Shapur I in 260, his demise was not only tragic, but also a symbol of Rome's vulnerability at a time when the empire was struggling against external and internal threats. The events leading to his capture, his final moments, and the aftermath of his death paint a grim picture of an emperor who fell from absolute power to a fate worse than death. Before Valerian's fall, Rome was in a state of crisis. The empire was dealing with continuous invasions from Germanic tribes in the west and the growing threat of the Sassanid Persians in the east. Valerian, who had come to power in 253, was determined to restore Rome's strength. His co-emperor and son, Gallienus, was left in charge of the western provinces, while Valerian led a massive army to the eastern frontier to deal with the Persian threat. His campaign initially had some success, but it quickly unraveled due to logistical failures, disease, and overall lack of strategy. In 260, Valerian's forces were defeated near Edessa, and he was taken captive by Shapur I, with this being the first time a Roman emperor had ever been captured alive by a foreign enemy. Unlike previous Roman rulers who had fallen in battle or been assassinated, Valerian faced a far worse fate. He was turned into a living trophy for the Persian king. Instead of being ransomed or treated with dignity, Valerian was reportedly subjected to years of humiliation. According to some sources, specifically those of the hostile Roman and Christian writers who enjoyed seeing his downfall, Shapur used the once mighty emperor as a footstool, forcing him to kneel whenever he needed to mount his horse. This public humiliation sent a strong message, which was that the mighty Rome had been brought down by Persia, and Valerian, once an all-powerful ruler, was now nothing more than a servant, stripped of his status and dignity. As if his daily humiliation was not enough, Valerian's death was even more horrifying. After years of mistreatment, Shapur allegedly ordered him to be executed in the most gruesome way possible. According to some historical accounts, Valerian was apparently flayed alive and forced to swallow molten gold as a final act of humiliation. There is also the belief that his skin was stripped from his body, tanned like leather, and stuffed with straw or manure. This grotesque trophy was then put on display in a Persian temple as a permanent reminder of Shapur's victory over Rome. The aftermath of Valerian's death was equally disastrous for Rome. His son, Gallienus, who had been co-ruling, was left to deal with an empire in turmoil. The Roman military suffered a severe blow, with morale at an all-time low due to the loss of an emperor in such a dishonorable manner. Additionally, the empire continued to fracture, with numerous generals declaring themselves emperors in different regions, leading to the crisis of the 3rd century. Meanwhile, Shapur I continued his conquest, feeling very confident by his triumph over Rome. In Roman history, Valerian's capture and brutal death became a cautionary tale about the dangers of overextending an empire and underestimating an enemy. Whether his death was as horrifying as some sources claim, or exaggerated by later historians, the story of Emperor Valerian remains one of the darkest chapters in Rome's history. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you learned something, make sure to leave a like, comment down below your thoughts on any of the events I discussed in this video, and subscribe if you would like to see a part 2 or more videos like this one. Thank you again, and goodbye.